cost is if we don't. And I think that cost is $10,000 a day.
So we look over to prevent a narrowhead subdivision.
Yes, not necessarily that ordinance in and of itself. I think just over time, I think we have regulations in place now that prevent that sort of thing, where you have subdivisions that were built back, like you say, back in the 60s and 70s. Many of them were built down in the floodplains or too low in the floodplains. Many of them did not have the proper catch basins and pipes and that sort of thing. Yes, that will prevent that.
Commissioner Kate.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And the reason for that is one of the findings that Tetra Tech came out of their study was they felt like the city and the county the county was not equivalent to the city on the subject of concrete pipe. So we will be putting that back in there. Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Smith.
Get up there, Bruce. There's three of us here. We're in different ends of the county. We all live in different subdivisions. How far back do you have on maps that say who has retention pond in his subdivision and his and in mine? How far back can you guys trace it? I mean, now you can trace it when you go to subdivision. You can find it pretty easy, but
probably back to the probably the middle 1970s. And I don't know when they started doing stormwater detention basins, but I have seen maps going back as far as the late 70s that would show up a stormwater detention basin.
So are you going to send that homeowner that has that basin there, are you going to send them a map of this is where the you'll have it outlined, this is where the retention pond is in your lot?
That's not part of what this ordinance does. In fact, I've got a stormwater detention in my backyard also. Usually it really depends on the course the county takes. On a new subdivision, you will be signing something. In fact, you all did it today. Those drainage covenants that you approved today, that's where the property owner is signing, saying they understand that this is a facility that they're going to have to maintain. And not only that, it also gives the county the right to go in and do inspections. And I know that the subject of, well, should a private property owner be required to do that type of maintenance responsibility? And that is a valid question. The only way I can respond to that is that we are not in a position to take on that responsibility, given the funding and staffing levels I have. It would be similar to you saying to me, can you take over all the building inspections within inside the city? Certainly we could, but I'm going to need the staff to do it. So that's why we're taking the tack we are with the private property approach, which is, by the way, the same way as the city of Knoxville does it, and also the town of Farragut.
And going back to the pipe, what you're saying, the concrete versus the plastic, is the plastic not a little bit better on the environment than the leaching out of the concrete?
It probably is, and I think the plastic is certainly is a material that definitely needs to be looked at. And in fact, in the draft report that Tetra Tech put out, their draft report, they did say, initially said the concrete pipe was a non-issue, and went on further to say the city of Knoxville should really look at allowing alternate materials such as plastic. They later revised in their final draft that they presented to my staff, said, the concrete pipe really is an issue. And so we've certainly looking towards the final draft said, well, if it is an issue, we will include it back in, we will make that amendment to our ordinance and include it back in and make it a non-issue, at least as far as the two comparisons are concerned.
Was it an issue in the professional opinion, or was it an issue in the
probably need to direct that question to them, because they will be doing a separate presentation on the comparisons and have them draw conclude why they essentially changed their recommendation on that.
A couple more. Harmon.
I think you'll find these to be non-controversial improvements, but let me just throw them out there. Your definition of wetlands is cribbed word for word from the Clean Water Act, and I thank you for that. But I think you should probably include the second sense of that definition as well. It would help expand and improve what that is. And also, when you mention wetlands, I think you should include both the EPA and Army Corps of Engineer definitions, because those may change over time, and we'd like to have the most strict of both of them. And finally, I think actually when you list some areas that are particularly dangerous for runoff, your list is pretty good, except you mentioned, if you leave out one of the most common sources of problems, which is gas stations. If you would add gas stations to that list, I think it would be a good improvement as well. And the proofreader and me points out that on page 31, you list a whole bunch of things, and the word rules, which is the key word in the sentence, is missing. So there's some little things there to improve, and I hope you will attend to all of them.
Yes, sir.
Okay, any more questions from commissioners? Okay, Dwight, Grant?
Also, if there's anybody that would like to have a question posed tonight and you don't feel comfortable, I'll be glad to ask it on your behalf if you just identify yourself to Grant and fill out a comment card. Mr. Scott Davis.
If we adjourn.
I know y'all have had a long day. I'll make it short. It must have been addressed to the concrete pipe issue, because that was news to me that that has been changed, and the recommendation there was going to change. And we can go back to Tetra Tech and see if there's any quantitative guidelines that show that one is better than the other. If they can prove that, then that's something we'll have to deal with. My question is how do we, is there a reevaluation, and when is reevaluation done to determine whether or not we do get off the Phase 2 list? How is that process done? When is it done? And what happens if we are removed from the Phase 2 list? Do these regulations, are they reverted, or what happens?
We will not get off the Phase 2 list unless we significantly reduce our population. The criteria there was incorporated areas or urbanized areas of a certain size. You may.
You talking about streaming?
Well, I was just going to. You may be asking about the 303D list. Yes, TDEC monitors those streams. They also, through the TMDLs, are going to be asking and requiring the county to monitor those streams. If the monitoring data comes back showing improvements, there is potential for those to be removed from the list, and that really is the overall of those two programs. So. TDEC has a watershed program. Different watersheds are monitored, I think, once or twice every 5 years, and it differs for whatever watershed you're in. If you have a specific question about a specific watershed, I can lead you to their website that kind of shows how they do what they do and when.
Okay, Dwight, you are.
I'm Karen Daly. I live at 2647 Bafford Place, and I do work in Knox County Parks and Recreation. I have a comment about the process. I got my job 5 years ago, and the person that had my job before me, Susan Kerr, was on the steering committee for the Site Planning Roundtable. So I just, part of my job duties, I didn't realize that she was going to facilitate this 2-year process. I did back out of that portion of it because I'm not a trained facilitator, but I stayed on the steering committee, helped organize it, and I want to speak to the quality of that process. And I don't think Mary May, although it was a public input process, more than that, it was a consensus building process. And if you can imagine putting the developers, the environmental activists, the engineers, the architects, everybody together and say, we would like you to reach agreement, 100% agreement, consensus on recommendations. It was quite a process, and a lot of folks, some people here in this room, but some people did drop out because 2 years is a big time commitment. But people did show up to these meetings. They learned to listen to each other's different opinions, and you just can imagine they didn't always agree. And when a developer said, well, if we do it that way, leaving all the trees, we can't make any money. And the environmentalists had to hear that and sort of take that in. From the other side, the environmentalists had to start to respecting that the developers were doing a business and had to meet certain parameters and regulations. So the process was really good. People came into it late and didn't, I don't think, appreciate or feel part of that whole process, so maybe felt like, what did I miss out on the beginning? And that was just a matter of chance when people came into it. But the process itself was very good. When we actually reached consensus, 100% agreement, on 22 of the 23 recommendations that we spent 2 years talking about, it was kind of a cause for celebration. And the only one we didn't reach consensus on, it was because we couldn't tie it to water quality. Everybody thought it was a good idea, but it was a cost that was going to get passed to developers that we couldn't say, yes, this would definitely improve water quality. So we agreed to drop that one. But that was really good, 22 recommendations on consensus. So this does go back to 2002. So long